Tonight, we are changing up the pace and doing something we haven't done in a very long time. All of the stories in tonight's video are allegedly true, mostly detailing creepers, stalkers, and robbers. I would like to say thank you to the individuals that have allowed me to share their stories. If you guys enjoy this format and would like to see more of it in the future, be sure to drop a like. I plan to make this summer as creepy as possible for you guys, so if you haven't already, consider pressing the bell notification to keep up with the content. Remember, you can send in your own story to my subreddit, r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description if you'd like to have a story featured on the channel. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. To start things off, this incident occurred in a small town community, where it's not really crime-ridden or exactly dangerous. Around this time last year, I was working full-time at a little Japanese retailer shop at the mall near my house. My schedule fluctuated, but the majority of my shifts were closing shifts. I preferred this because it gave me enough time to sleep in, make myself a lunch, catch the bus, get to the mall a bit earlier to buy snacks and a drink, before I begin my dreaded 8.5-hour shift. On one particular day, as I was getting ready to walk to the bus stop, I saw a big commotion going on right across from my house, at the town hall. I crossed the street, right in time before several other police cars and an ambulance rushed by, sirens wailing so loud, I'm sure the entire neighborhood heard. I was wondering what was going on but quickly disregarded it. As I got to the first bus nearby my house, I got off at the intersection where I'm supposed to take a second bus. That leads me straight to the terminal across the mall. While I was waiting at the shelter, I see a guy, around my age, in his 20s, staring right at me, with eyes so black and empty. Mind you, there was no one else around besides the two of us. I remember thinking to myself that it seemed odd he was wearing a sweater with a heavy-looking backpack and construction boots, both of which looked oversized for his tall, slim figure. When it was blazing hot outside, not even for a split second, did he once tear his gaze away from me. Then, it quickly hit me that I recognized him as a regular customer that frequently comes in to buy earphones at the store I worked at. Now, I usually try to keep to myself, but for some reason, I've been told I draw all kinds of people to me with my friendly, positive aura. I felt the need to pretend that I was on my phone to avoid any sort of conversation. He then proceeded to take a seat beside me, still gazing at me, and mustered a hi, before going on that he recognized me from work, and if I was going there right now, etc. When the bus finally arrived, we both got on, and he took a seat next to me. We had small talk about random stuff and our hobbies. He went on to tell me about his broken relationship with his parents, where he ended up getting kicked out. I assumed he was homeless at first, but he kind of confirmed it subtly, and he told me that he's been couch surfing between friends' houses. We finally reached the bus terminal that's across the mall. He ended up walking me to my work. I didn't ask him to, before going off his own way. Before departing, he asked for my number, which I stupidly gave to him and told me, if you ever want to just chill or smoke with me, to text me. After conversing with him, I shrugged off any preconceived judgment I had of him earlier of being creepy. For just a guy that's socially awkward and perma-fried. He ended up texting me later on that night asking to hang out, but I cut the conversation short, telling him I was tired and also had work the next day. I never heard from him again. Now, here's where things get interesting. After a few days and then weeks, news reports were coming out that there was a violent sexual assault that occurred right where the trails were across my house, near the town hall. The victim was a teenage girl who was going for a walk when she was struck with an unknown object by the subject. He happened to be armed with a gun and proceeded to sexually assault her before leaving the scene. It took about a week for the police to find the subject. The investigation was ongoing. It shook up the entire community. Nothing like this has happened before. It's fairly peaceful and close-knit. It's scary because it happened right in broad daylight, so when police released images of the suspect, with his name, following his arrest, I damn near had a heart attack. It was him, the same guy who I met at the bus stop, who walked me to my work, who asked for my number, who was texting me throughout the day after committing the crime. He had the same dark, black, empty eyes, long hair, and wearing the exact sweater, backpack, and shoes. I started looking at past news reports to compare the dates and times to when he texted me, and they all matched. Needless to say, my intuition about people are on and off, and that I should learn to trust it more. I felt a bit of guilt hoping I could have done something earlier, but there was no way for me to know until after. I started waiting tables when I was 18 to supplement my hourly income at a popular fast food chain, and soon enough I became well acquainted with an old man named Tim. He's probably in his early to mid 60s and very obese. He would regularly come into the little diner that I worked at, and was a regular prior to my employment there. The other younger females who worked in the restaurant didn't like to wait on him because he was kinda weird, and had a creepy, overly excited / animated type of vibe. But I didn't mind because it was a guaranteed $5 to $10 every day. I was good at talking to people, good at putting up with bullshit, and used the adjective unfuckwithable to describe myself. So I happily entertained him in a family-friendly environment. The first thing he would do was make cartoons on the computer and excitedly give them to me or the other servers. The other servers were uncomfortable with it, even though at this point it was very innocent. It was generic clip art, and maybe had everyone's names written by each character. Still, some servers were uncomfortable enough that management had asked him to stop bringing them in. He asked if I liked them, almost in an unexplainable childlike way, seeking approval. So I told him they were cute and fun because they were harmless enough, and I could tell that making them and gifting them made him happy. I figured it was his pastime during the later part of his life. He was unmarried, had no kids, and his daily hobby was visiting different women at different restaurants. Some of them older, some of them younger like I was. He would regularly talk about the lives of the other waitresses he would visit, and though I hadn't met any of them, I genuinely felt like I knew them. I just figured the guy was lonely, and there's nothing wrong with that. He would call me Sunshine, and try to offer advice where it wasn't warranted or solicited. I wasn't afraid to, respectfully, yet aggressively, put him in his place. I remember one specific occasion that he tried to criticize my relationship with my boyfriend, and it was like what you'd think a super conservative grandparent might think, expressed to me if he was my father, and providing me life-changing insight to put me on the right path. Though I wasn't on a wrong path. I was a full-time student, full-time employee, fully supported myself, and had a good attitude and outlook on life. Hence the adjective unfuckwithable. Anyway, I put him in his place so hard and so fast that he turned sheepish and childlike, like he transitioned from trying to be a father to acting like a child who needed my approval. The next time he visited, he had a hand-carved woodworking that he had made with my boyfriend's initials on them as an apology. He would buy me packs of gum and mints and tape printed photos of himself with a scolding look and the caption, "No smoking, Sunshine," to try to detour me from cigarettes. I've since quit, without his help. Everyone else thought it was creepy, but whatever, right? Through the first year of me being his waitress, his gifts and actions got progressively more expressive. He started writing poems and short stories that had bad grammar and were so elementary they were almost painful. But he told me he just started to try it out, so I encouraged him, thinking he's lonely and needs a pastime. I had no problem with him writing little Hallmark card-style poems and giving them to me. The slightly off-putting aspect of this was that all of the poems and stories had a general theme of love and family. Also, I think it was around this time that he started looking at my Facebook page regularly. We weren't friends, and I told him I was never going to accept a friend request, so don't ever send one. Harsh, but boundaries, right? He would occasionally Photoshop pictures of me from my Facebook page, and maybe put my face on a cartoon body or something like that. He also kind of started to obsess over the fact that I was a twin, and he became very interested in me and all of my sisters. He would write stories about the twins, or the sisters, or make comic book style artwork about the twin superheroes. He even found a photo of my twin on Facebook somewhere, and started using her face photoshopped on things too. When I did some traveling, I took some artsy style pictures with a view of the background, and he took the liberty to Photoshop other tourists out of the background, light in the sky, and print lamented pictures with fancy borders for me to have. Thinking about it now, he probably kept these photos for himself too. After a year at my first serving job, I left for another serving job where I would be working weird third shift hours. I kind of thought that would be the end of Tim, but boy was I wrong. He went out of his way to come at the weird hours, and at the new place at least twice a week. I still maintained my fast food job, and he even started to visit me there, at a place that people rarely come in and sit down to eat. Never once did I tell him my schedule. He would just drive by and see my car. The stories he would write became progressively sexual and longer. I guess he finally felt comfortable to share these things with me, and he would always preface me for anything that was more erotic. It was like he wanted a friend, he wanted to be my father, and he wanted me to be his mother, all in his weird, childish, overly animated type of way. A few times he made me the subject of his stories, though he never went super explicit with those. One that sticks out to me was a super sexy, badass cowgirl sheriff, and all the men of the saloon wanted me. He would include weird freaking details like how someone had an STD. If I remember correctly, he made my sister the character that got an STD, and I had a huge issue with it. And I particularly had a huge issue with the fact that he started the story with, "This is the true story of." He rewrote the story without changing anything except for, "This is not a true story," and "Who did not get an STD?" I don't know. It was wild. There's also a weird photo that he took of my sister and I when she worked at the same place as I did. The whole time I knew him, he took a total of 2 pictures of me with his digital camera, and this was one of them. He had us pose with our hands out like we had a serving platter sitting on our hands. He then photoshopped a plate with his head on it, and photoshopped knives in our hands. He thought it was the funniest thing ever, and printed and laminated one for each of us to keep. At this point, I've known this man and been well acquainted with him for nearly 3 years. I genuinely felt sorry for the guy, and felt like I was able to offer him a friend when he really needed one. Aside from visiting waitresses, his hobbies included visiting an occasional burlesque show and attending the local courts just for fun. I was very aware that something was off about him, but I was okay with it because, though it was too hard to pinpoint exactly, I understood and also knew he would never, or could never, his size and fitness, hurt me. Admittedly, this was a fault of mine as a server. I offered more than food. I accidentally became a psychiatrist. There was a mid-20-year-old with autism I became good buddies with, despite him offering me money every once in a while for a blowjob. There was a 40-year-old man who thought he was going to marry a stripper half his age after he gave her all of his savings and sold his Mustang to give her more money. And there was the paranoid 50-year-old schizophrenic man who had clearly never been diagnosed or received any help, and I was honored to be the person he felt comfortable practicing his social skills with. I don't know. I digress. I guess I just want to be transparent that I was aware of all the red flags, but I was okay with it. But then things started to really cross a line, though they were probably already past when I got engaged. He would ask me stuff like if I'd let him hold my baby when I have kids, and he started to write stories and make cards and cartoons from my fiancé's perspective. He would say, "I bet this is how Luke feels about you." He would also do it from a mother's perspective, saying stuff like, "It must be a mother's dream." I mean, at this point he was seriously making me so much stuff, be it cartoons, pictures, or stories, that he would bring it all to me in a manila folder, and it would be along the lines of fatherly, motherly, childish, silly, sexual, romance, and etc. I decided to keep the folders in my filing cabinet, just in case there was ever some type of case against him that needed evidence. My fiancé and I had an open dialogue about Tim, and at this point, we decided that it was best to cut him off. I was looking for a new job to get off of the wacky hours I was working, and the timing just seemed right. Tim was also regularly sending me applications to all restaurants he wouldn't mind going to. So yeah, there needed to be a break. My fiancé wanted to talk to him, so I didn't seem like the bad guy, and all contact was cut. He respected it, to an extent. After cutting him off, Tim still had a weird contact with me through my older sister. She was a server at another restaurant that he frequented, though she avoided him and asked to never serve him given his interactions with me. However, she was also engaged and her wedding date was approaching. He also wrote her letters and made her cards with words that were way too heartfelt coming from a stranger regarding her marriage. Anyway, Tim decided to ask a few of the other servers if they were planning on going to the wedding. 2 of them were, and upon hearing this news, Tim described me in detail and asked the other servers to try to take some pictures of me for him. When I heard this, it was about 6 months after I had cut him off. I had a big fat eye roll over it, and thought whatever about it because the servers weren't going to do it, and he was still respecting our request to not contact me any longer. It's also relevant to note he's been blocked from my Facebook, which I haven't been actively using in 2 years or more anyway, but prior to the cutoff, even shortly after the cutoff, he still sent me multiple messages on Facebook every day, from as simple as "Good morning sunshine" to intricate and extensive stories. So, a timeline reminder before the punchline. I first waited on him around May 2015. He followed me to my next job and my long-term fast food job around the middle of 2016 and continued to follow me. I cut him off around February or March of 2018. When I was cleaning up my filing cabinet in December of 2019, I stupidly decided that I can throw all the weird, creepy, unsolicited artwork away. It had been nearly 2 years with no issues, no attempt to contact, and the stuff was just cluttering my space. Last week, I was sitting in my living room. A recognizable vehicle is parked outside of my driveway on the wrong side of the road. The man has his car window down, and I see a flash. I quickly grab my glasses to try to discern what the fuck is going on. I see his childish, overly animated smile, and I recognize his hair and facial hair, and realize the shirt he is wearing is the exact type of shirt Tim wears. I realize I recognize the vehicle because it's the same vehicle that would pull up to my place of employment 3 to 5 times a week for almost 3 years. Flash. I realize it's fucking Tim outside of my motherfucking residence, over 2 years later, taking pictures of my car and home with that goddamn digital camera that he took my picture with twice before in the past. I've been reading a lot of posts from here, and I'm remembering some weird stuff that happened to me and my family. I've already posted one story here, and it helped me to deal and realize that things are not as safe as I think. Sorry about my English, by the way. I'm Brazilian. This happened last year when I, a female, 24 years old, was visiting my mom. My neighborhood is known for being safe, or at least, that's what my family thought. We've got problems with neighbors on both sides of our house. We live in a small town that has been growing due to the university that was built in here. My mom lives across the street from the uni, cause she teaches there. Our house has 2 floors and my room is on the 2nd floor. The window is right on the front of our house, so you can see the street from it. Every night around midnight, when I was going to sleep, I heard my dogs barking and growling. Whenever I went to the window to see why they are barking, I couldn't see a thing. There are a lot of trees and bushes in front of my house, so maybe what was making them bark was hiding there. This went for at least a week, and it was always at midnight. This night, I was having trouble sleeping, so I was video chatting with my boyfriend. At midnight, my dogs were barking like crazy. I was sitting right in front of my window and couldn't see anything unusual, but I felt a weird vibe, like I was about to discover what was hiding on my front yard and scaring my dogs. I turned off the lights and stayed still, watching the streets in a placement that who was outside couldn't see me. My boyfriend was still chatting with me, saying that maybe it was a fox or a raccoon, because there's a lot of wildlife around where my mom lives, but I knew it wasn't an animal. I stayed there for a long time. My boyfriend went to sleep, and I kept looking at the window. It was about 1:30 when I saw something moving from the bushes. It was a man wearing all black, crouched right behind the bushes. My body froze, and I didn't call my mom to see it. I've already told her about my dogs going crazy in our front yard at the same time every night, but like my boyfriend, she said maybe it was an animal. So I was there looking at him, and he couldn't see me. He started moving but still was bent over so no one could see him. But as I was on the 2nd floor, I could see him just fine. He crawled with his back right next to our fence until he reached the neighbor's gate. Right inside that gate was a car parked. What happened next was really fast. He lit up a Molotov cocktail and tossed it in the car. That car went up in flames like crazy, and I finally called my mom to see what was happening. He ran away like a feral cat, so fast down the street. My mom was calling the police and then the firemen, but as they got here, the man was long gone. The next day, my mom got a call from the police officer that came the night before, telling her that they arrested the man that did it. He was trying to convince his ex-wife, who was our neighbor, to get back with him. He said he would make things worse if she didn't get back with him. After that, she moved out in a week. We never really talked to her, so I don't know any more details. I'm happy he got arrested. I'm sad I only managed to do something after he set her car on fire. I apologize for the length, and obligatory, I'm writing this on my phone. This is a memory that keeps popping up in my head. I still shiver at the thought of it, even though most people tell me I'm being paranoid. I think they're saying that to make me feel better, but so far, it hasn't worked. In 2015, I was living with my then boyfriend. I was 18 at the time. We were living in a very sketchy apartment building in a very sketchy neighborhood. When I say sketchy, I mean crack house type of sketchy. You'd find anything from alcoholics, severely mentally ill people to drug dealers and heroin addicts living in these apartments. And the police were called to the property once or twice every 2 weeks. We even drove by sometimes to check for safety reasons. There was an incident once during the night. One of the neighbors knocked on the door, and my boyfriend went to open up while I was asleep. One of the neighbors, a drug addict who happened to be severely schizophrenic, was at the door, and he barged into the apartment and threatened my boyfriend with a knife. Luckily, my boyfriend managed to calm him down and got him out of the apartment. For reasons like this, we bought a live security camera that we installed on our door that also connected to our TV, so that we could easily check who was at the door. Everything was fine for a couple of weeks, until this one night. My boyfriend's best friend was sleeping over this weekend, and I thank God for that. We were all sleeping. I guess it was around 3 or 4 a.m. at the time, when I woke up to someone ringing the doorbell. The camera was connected to the TV, but there was also a small screen attached to the door that I could activate to see who was outside. Since everyone was sleeping in the living room, I walked into the hallway to check the small screen instead of turning the TV on. When I pressed the button, I saw 2 guys wearing hoodies looking at the camera. I paused for a second because I didn't fully understand what was going on. Not until they looked at each other, nodded, then one of the guys reached his hand towards the camera and ripped it out, making the screen go black. I stood there for about 5 seconds before I realized what happened. I ran back to the living room and shook my boyfriend awake, almost yelling, well, also whispering, "Quick, get up, someone just stole your camera." He darted up and ran outside. Didn't even bother to put on a shirt or shoes. All the noise woke his buddy up, naturally. According to him later on, he saw a guy running away into a wooded area, so he chased after him. What he didn't know at the time was that I saw 2 guys and not just one. Well, I think the guy who ran away was just the distraction, because about a minute after he ran out, I heard someone entering the hallway. I froze in absolute terror. Buddy noticed that and sprinted to the door separating the hallway and living room. The conversation went something along the lines of, "Intruder. Oh, is boyfriend's name here? Buddy. No, he's not. Oh, could I maybe just come inside and sit down for a minute? I don't think that would be appropriate since he isn't here for the moment. Oh, but I could just come inside and wait for him until he gets back. That's a no. You're gonna have to leave. Please, just for a minute. No, please leave." He left. Buddy came in with a shocked but also frightened expression on his face. Both of us were in awe about what just happened. My boyfriend came back about 5 minutes later and told us about the unsuccessful chase. Both me and Buddy were terrified as he started telling us what happened while he was outside. Boyfriend said he only saw one guy outside. When I had the time to process the situation, my theories were: A, they stole the camera as a distraction so my boyfriend would chase him, while guy 2 raided the apartment while he was out. B, they knew I was there, but not that Buddy was. They stole the camera to lure him out, so the other one could walk in and either rob the place, assault me, or both. Both of these options are likely, The first one more than the other. The reason I also suspect the second theory is because most of the neighbors knew that I lived there with them. Many of them had seen me leaving and entering the apartment, and many of them occasionally said hi to me in passing, so most of the neighbors knew about me as well. I'm also incredibly small, 5 foot tall even, so I'd be an awfully easy target. Luckily, we'll never know what would have happened that night. I don't know what could have happened if he wasn't there that night, but I know for a fact that something would have happened to me. If I wasn't a target to begin with, I definitely would have become one if the guy walked in and saw me alone. I think whatever guardian angel that placed Buddy there that specific night. Every time I have told this story to friends, they've told me I am being paranoid and that I probably wouldn't have gotten hurt. But I don't believe that. Nobody planned such a break-in without malicious intent to begin with, so I don't doubt for a second that I wouldn't have been caught in the middle of it if I were alone. So to whoever those hooded guys were that stole our camera and entered the apartment, I hope we never meet again. Back in late 2016, I, female then 23, was moving from NYC to Boston. 2 college friends, also female, agreed to live with me and we started looking for an apartment. We were fond of one place in particular, out in the suburbs next to a forest park. I got to talking with the landlord, an older man probably in his 70s, and mentioned that I repair antique dolls. He excitedly said he had a doll his mother's uncle had brought her back from Germany in World War I, and the elastic holding the arms on had worn out. I said I could definitely fix it, and we exchanged contact info. He was firm that my work would have to take place at his house since he was nervous about moving a fragile antique, but at the time, I didn't think anything of it. Now that I'm older and wiser, I know doll doctor house calls are not the norm. Ultimately, we went with another place closer to the city proper, but I didn't want to lose a prospective doll repair client. I called him a week or so after we got settled, and once again, he seemed delighted to get his family heirloom fixed. Nothing seemed odd until I asked for his address to work out how to get there.
Don't worry about it,
He said.
I'll pick you up. What's your new address?
My eagerness cooled a little. I tried to put him off by saying that I didn't want to bring him out of his way, and I could get myself there no problem, but he kept insisting. Never even told me what town he lived in, just repeated over and over that it was fine, he'd pick me up, it would be no trouble at all. Eager for the business, and a bit embarrassed about my paranoia, I caved. I told him my address and we arranged a date and time for him to pick me up. Over the next few days, literally everyone in my life told me to call and cancel. My housemates asked if I'd lost my mind. My mom and sister both told me I was driving them mad with worry. To be honest, I think I was looking for an excuse to call the whole thing off. It just didn't feel right. I called the evening before the appointed day and left a message saying that something had come up. I added that if he was free the following Monday, my housemate could drive me over, so he wouldn't be inconvenienced. Which was true. She'd offered in a last-ditch effort to make me see sense. The next day, the time we'd picked rolled around. I was sitting in the living room, working on a sewing project when a car pulled up in front of the house. I looked down, and my heart jumped when I recognized the old man sitting in the driver's seat. He didn't look up, didn't appear to see me, just sat there for what felt like a century until, finally, he started the car and drove off. I never saw him again. He never contacted me about getting his mother's precious doll repaired. And maybe I was overreacting to an innocent old guy with poor social skills who forgot to call back. But I had a bad feeling about the situation, and ultimately, think I did the right thing. The part that creeps me out the most is, I almost had this man for my landlord. It could have been fine, or it could have been much, much worse. Okay, I'm going to try to explain this clearly without it being a novel. In my early 20s, I waitressed and bartended at a hotel restaurant. Construction workers in town for work often stayed at the hotel and would come eat and drink at the restaurant. I met a really tall, cute guy. Not the creep, but ultimately a prick. And whenever he was in town, he would hang out and whatever. He lived 2 states over, but was in my area a lot. So one time he was working a job and staying in a town the state over, and I drove to meet him. When I got to his hotel, and we went to the hotel bar and had a few drinks with some other construction guys that happened to be there. Not his company. Then went back to the room. Later we decided to order food from the bar. The prick was in the shower when the bar called, so I went and picked up our food. When I got down there, the guys we were drinking with earlier were still there, and pretty sauced by this time. The bartender was busy for a while, so I sat and played the digital slots. One of the construction guys, the creep, came over and immediately started hitting on me and trying to touch me and put his arm around me and crap, despite knowing full well I was there with someone else. He kept telling me his room number over and over. I had to directly, loudly, tell him to get away from me, and he finally did once others started noticing. In my flustered rage, I grabbed my food from the bartender and went back to the room and told the prick all about it. He rolled his eyes but kind of shrugged it off. I was really put off by it and felt really vulnerable. That's when I realized my phone was gone. Fuck. I left it at the bar on the slot machine. Prick and I went to the bar to look for it. The guys were gone, but the bartender told me the creep took my phone and assured me he was going to return it to me. Great. Then I remembered that he had told me his room number. I told the prick this, and he of course passively accused me of asking for it. I didn't care, and marched him to Creep's room. I knocked, and the prick, 6'7" by the way, stayed to the side out of view of the peephole to see what would happen. The creep, way too enthusiastically, swung the door open and grabbed my wrist and proceeded to try to pull me into the room. Thank God for the prick, who then stepped behind me and yelled, "Hey," to the creep, who was half his size. I'll never forget the look on the creep's face, like he just shat a full brick. I yanked my arm away and yelled, "Give me my phone." The creep lied and said he didn't have it, and the bartender was lying and blah blah. The prick didn't do anything else at this point, so we just left. I felt defeated and unsafe and annoyed and just wanted to leave, but I couldn't because I didn't have my phone. I managed to sleep a little that night, but woke up at like 4:30 a.m. when the prick left to go to work. I stayed in the hotel room till about 7 a.m. just fuming. Then I decided to do something about it. I gathered my stuff and went and found a maintenance man who was working in the pool area. I contemplated telling him the whole story, but decided to just damsel in distress it to avoid more drama. I told him I was leaving and realized I had locked my phone in my room and gave him the creep's room number. We went to his room and I had the maintenance man call my cell phone from his. Sure enough, you could hear a faint vibrating through the door. He took this as proof of it being my room and opened the door and let me in. I thanked him and he left. I grabbed my phone and turned to leave, but decided my petty ass wasn't done yet. I took the creep's toothbrush and ran it all along the toilet rim and put it back in the same spot. Then I happily left, phone in hand, and stopped seeing the prick for good. I still smile knowing that the creep had to notice that my phone was gone, but probably had no idea how I got it back, or that he was brushing his teeth with toilet water. Precursor. I've aged since then. I do not fall for these tricks as easily as I did then. I still hope for the good in people, but I usually doubt it's there for a while. I went to beauty school just after high school, so I was just learning what it was like to be an adult. Work, go to school, and socialize all at the same time. If you've ever gone to beauty school, you know the hours are pretty lengthy, and it's a lot of work in a short amount of time. You also know that you're mostly crammed with a lot of women of different ages, and a few boys. If there's a straight man in school, and he's even mildly attractive, obviously considering you're attracted to that type of person, most women in school are just so at awe because it's the only male person we are seeing during most of our weeks. That takes me to Dave, a few years older than me, tall, drives a Ducati to school, mysterious and handsome. Every girl was always putting on a little extra makeup, turning their hips toward him, flirting when he was around. He was cute, quiet, and always knew what to say. I wasn't as interested in catching his eye till he randomly asked me to meet up with him for a bite one day after school. I was single, needing to experience dating for the first time, and he didn't seem that bad to hang out with. Things started off very sweet and genuine. He'd send goodnight texts, joke with me at school, and even genuinely seemed like he wanted to hang out more and more. We'd go to bars and he knew everyone, so I could just get right in. I was underage at the time. We'd go eat, see shows, two-step, drink. I felt like I was starting to feel like an adult, enjoying the life, and being wooed by a handsome, slightly older man. We'd drive around on his bike, he'd take me to nice, quiet dinners, always offer to pay, and even did little things like hold his arm out when I walked downstairs or off a curb. I had never experienced this type of gentleman before, but as quickly as the sweet dates came, so did a very weird, calculated, and controlling behavior. He would start to ask why I didn't smile with my teeth. Was it because I was embarrassed of myself? He would sit behind me working at school and taunt me about how slow I was. He'd say things like, "Don't sit like that," or "Say things that way. That's not what ladies do, and I'm a lady, right? Don't wear that lipstick, it's trashy." But I guessed maybe I was being inappropriate. Maybe he's right. I should act more like an adult than a child. Be better at school, look more like an adult. He brought me to his house one night, a place he rented a room from. Suddenly the stoic, Edward Cullen type turned into a person I didn't recognize, outside of the random mood shift. His room was filled with clothing and garbage, like old Gatorade bottles filling the floors. There was a TV and a bed. Of all the things I could really make out in the room, he brushed dirt off his bed for me to sit down. We hung out for a while and he oddly confessed he never brushes his teeth. Okay. Well, looking at this room, I could believe that. He also mentioned that he just bought new clothes when he needed them and never washed the dirty ones. Just left them there. This was all in the first 2 to 3 weeks. Kinda red flags if you ask me. The lights were off at one point and we're just watching a show, and I see a light like a cell phone right outside the window behind the TV. I jump and get his attention, but he had to have seen. He brushes it off, saying it must just be a roommate, though I notice he's texting someone at the same time. I let it go for the night, eventually go home, but still feel uncomfortable. Then the phone calls start happening and the stories of his ex. They lived together. She was 10 years older than him and had a 6-year-old kid. She was crazy. If he and I would hang out, I'd suddenly start getting calls from the unknown number the minute I walked in my door. They would ring till my voicemail got them, and no one would say a word till the message ran out of time. They'd happen every 10 minutes for 3 or so hours. I asked him about this, if it was him, and he said it may just be his crazy ex. But how would she have my number? He'd say, well, I had to give her some of her things and she stole my phone at one point, must have taken your number. Still, the gentlemanly dates would happen, and the gifts. The gifts. Sending roses and coffee to my work, showing up with massage and spa packages every week. We still saw each other at beauty school almost daily, and he'd be kind, but it was always hush-hush until it was outside of school. I was torn. Is this person lying, or is this the first kind person to want to date me? Maybe he just has some flaws and a crazy ex. Then the texts and Facebook messages started coming, clarifying it was her. He told me about your fucked up life and secrets you've told him. I know he just saw you. I know you were just at his house. I was outside his window looking in. Your red dress was nice. He laughs about you. Poor you. Just a whore, little girl. And shit like that over and over. I'd block her, and she'd have friends send me the same BS. She freaked me out, and he always denied it and apologized for her behavior. Then there were days he wouldn't show up for school, and he would text me during the day saying they were together, sending pictures of him. I tried to confront him, but he always denied having anything to do with her, and repeating that she wanted to ruin his life. Then she started going to my work, telling my coworkers she was my friend, and would color things on kids' menus like my name plus his name, heart, and then tell them she wanted me to have it. She'd send me a random picture of him in a booth at my work, and I'd put the pieces together when I got there and got her notes, asking the coworkers where she was sitting and what she looked like. It was gross and embarrassing, let alone scary. My car was broken into at school, and nothing was taken from it but a bill that had my address on it. I was then so scared. I'd come home at any point in time, and she'd start calling over and over as soon as I closed the door behind me. I felt trapped. She would call my work and school saying she was my mom and try to get more info on me, or call them as a customer, trying to get me fired. My roommates finally kicked me out because they were rightfully freaked out, so I turned to the police. They put me in contact with a detective who I handed all of the calls, texts, and messages plus notes she left me at work. I never answered the phone or responded to a single message from her. I had hundreds of calls, texts, for at least a month. They came in every day from the same number. I never blocked that number after the first few were blocked, so I could keep a log on all of the attempts. Plus, I kept a journal of every incident leading up to me coming to the police, just in case. I watched a lot of crime documentaries. He told me there was nothing he could do to trace the number back to a specific person, and since she hadn't threatened my physical safety, his hands were tied. The very next day he calls me and is furious, telling me he can't help me if I'm harassing her back. I was confused, and when I asked what the hell he meant, he said, "You're calling a mother non-stop throughout the night, terrifying her and her kid." Because I was the 20-year-old and she was 36. Of course he's going to believe the adult, but I never called her. He asked me to come to his office to show me his evidence he has against me. She's forwarded him tons of texts saying things like, "You're a little whore who I hope loses their kid." And I just broke down. I would never say something like that to someone, and I know I didn't send these tens of texts, especially overnight. When I had school the next day, he didn't believe me and dismissed me. He ultimately turned against me and was now on her side. This was crushing. I broke things off for good with Dave. Basically told him to fuck the fuck off. We still had to go to school together, and he was a complete dick. I embarrassed myself in front of my friends defending him so long. My work, my school, who I had to beg to make sure this girl didn't come around again, and a detective who ultimately didn't believe a word I said, just to get some peace. My friends were tired of seeing me scared, stressed, and constantly talking about this weird situation happening to me. I was over it all. She finally left me alone once I moved, got a new car, new phone, deleted social media, but it still freaks me out that we all live in the same town. She messaged me a few years ago from a different account when I was back on social media and said she was sorry, that she was manipulated by Dave, and that they did this to many girls. This was disturbing and gut-wrenching to me. Did a mother of a 6-year-old really have nothing better to do than play fucked up games with a sociopath? Maybe two sociopaths together, I guess. I work at a convenience store. I've had some creepy customers come in before, but this one was a little more disturbing. If it weren't for what had been said and done, I don't think this would have been that bad. I normally work third shift, which is 4 p.m. to around 12 a.m., and I'm by myself for the last 4 hours of my shift. This man had come in earlier that day and was acting odd, jittery, chewing at his lip constantly, fumbling with his debit card, to the point I did everything for him except putting the pin in. Fast forward to around 10:30 p.m. I'm sweeping the floors as I'm supposed to do every night when the man entered. He approached my register, and I asked him what he needed. "Hey, can I have one of those lighters?" I pick one up and go to scan it, but he tells me that he doesn't have any money. I tell him he can't have it, and he glares at me before leaving. A man was in line behind him, and the entire time I was scanning his things, the lighter guy was staring at me through the window right next to my register. He eventually walks off, and the man jokes about the creepy guy asking for a lighter when he, the man in line, didn't even have his with him. He tells me to be safe, then walks out to the gas pumps. I start sweeping again, but then I turn around to move a small crate out of my way. The creepy guy is staring at me again, just watching me work. I quickly make my way to the back room to make my mop water so I could get away from him for a second. He stayed there for a solid 5 minutes before stalking off again. I grabbed a random receipt as a cover and basically bolted to the man at the gas pumps. I got close and asked if he was in a hurry to go anywhere. I told him that the creepy lighter guy was still hanging around and that it was really freaking me out. He promised me that he didn't plan on actually leaving after getting gas. At this point, I thought it wouldn't take up too much of his time, since we both thought the man was already wandering away from the store. Unfortunately, He went back toward the store a few seconds later. Soon, an older woman comes in and I warn her about the creepy guy. She asks what I was talking about, and I subtly nod in his direction. Mind you, still hanging around my window. She looks a little disturbed, leaning in and whispering, "What does he want?" I explained that he wanted a lighter, but didn't have money, so I didn't give him one. I told her to be careful, and she quickly told me to worry more about myself, since I was at the store alone. She left, and I saw the creepy guy approach the window again. Thankfully, he didn't look in, just hung around it like he was waiting for someone. After a while, a daughter of a family friend comes in with her girlfriend, and we quietly make small talk, like the last woman. I warned them that later guy was still roaming around and he could be dangerous. Before they get to tell me anything, a woman who was talking with the guy from the gas pumps spotted them while scanning family friend's items, hurried in and told me to call the cops. Obviously not familiar with the area I worked in, and hearing 3 different people telling me what numbers to call, I was shaking and near tears. Family friend said she would call while I calmed down. Another girl had run out at this point, and I don't blame her. Family friend's girlfriend told me that later guy had threatened to throw rocks through the window and hurt and rob me. After about 3 minutes of pacing and trying not to cry, I saw my mom's truck pull in. I bolted to her, telling her what was going on. She calmed me down and walked me back to the entrance. As this happened, creepy guy had climbed the hill and crossed the street to Bojangles and sat near the front door. Cops arrived. The man from the pumps gave a statement. I gave mine. And finally, family friend gave hers, which included the threats. From what was said, he was about to break into my car. The man that stayed with me stopped him, and that didn't stop the creep from roaming still. After we talked to the cops, they sped to Bojangles and confronted the lighter guy. After arguing, a quick pat down, and more arguing, the man was put in the back of the cop car. When I was 19 or 20, I used to work for a well-known gas station chain, a lot of the time on evening shift, 4 to 12. I was alone. Though both cash registers were behind a wall of plexiglass, there was still a 2 to 3 foot opening between them where a sliding door is for the night shift to close to avoid robberies. It was about 5 p.m. and still daylight when this guy came in. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up when he walked in. There was just something about him that wasn't right. I should also add, I'm a female, if my username didn't already give it away. He walked to the back of the store, made it seem like he was looking for something in my coolers, and by the back shelves. He never once picked anything up to read or look over, and every now and then he'd look up at me. He'd gradually make his way toward me, and would retreat to the back of the store when someone came in. This went on for about 10 minutes. These 2 women came in and went to my coolers at the back of the store. I quickly wrote a note on a piece of paper that said, "Please stay with me so I can call the cops." When one of the ladies came to pay, I showed her the note. She nodded and went and told her friend. I had my eye on the creepy guy while trying to keep from completely panicking. One of the ladies leaves the store. The other lingers around the store. She looks outside and sees something, then leaves. Immediately after she left, and I was about to hit call, the creepy guy rushes up to the counter. He looks up to the glass door as he's 2 feet from me, then bolts. I look outside, and the 2 ladies are talking to the cop that had just pulled up, as the creep was running up to my counter to get gas. The creepy guy must have seen the cop and decided it wasn't worth it. The cop looks over the guy as he takes off, then comes inside to talk to me. I explained to him his behavior, and how my finger was on the call button as soon as he pulled up to get gas. The 2 ladies came back in to make sure I was alright, then left. The cop leaves, then comes back about 30 minutes later, saying they picked the guy up. He explained the guy was high on meth, and was looking for someone to rob to fuel his habit more. He was also in possession of a hunting knife, and the cop figured he would have seriously harmed me to get what he wanted. To this day, I thank my lucky stars the cop pulled up when he did. So this by far is the craziest and scariest first date I have ever had in my life. The date itself lasted about 2 hours, so keep that in mind when you are reading about the tornado of events that unfolded. So to start from the beginning, I, 30 female, met this guy on Bumble, 39 male, of course. Well, I was renting a room at a sober house in Colorado Springs to get everything squared away to officially move out here. Nursing license transferred, job, apartment. After I officially moved out and got settled in, we talked on the phone a few times and decided to meet in person. It was about 4 in the afternoon, and we planned to have dinner and maybe go on a scenic drive. He had asked me to pick him up from his work, and we could go from there. Didn't think much of it at the time, so I went to his work and picked him up, figuring I would drop him back off so he could take his car and go home. When I picked him up, the first thing he told me to do when we got in my car is stop at the liquor store. He wanted to grab something for later. After he told me to stop at the liquor store, I felt kind of awkward because he knew that I was in recovery. At this point in my recovery, I feel okay with being around alcohol. He came out of the liquor store with 2 shooters of Patron and a bottle of vodka. Not even minutes after leaving the liquor store, and me heading to the place where we were going to get food, he is slamming the shots of Patron in my car. I started noticing with his behavior that he was very manic, and kind of jumping from subject to subject, and then would randomly ask me if I was upset, if he had done something to make me mad. I have all bad vibes, and can tell something is very off with him. During our drive to get the food, he's telling me how, when he was little, he threw a rock purposely at a bunny and killed it, and also within the last 5 years was at a bonfire with his friends, and shot a cat that was in a field. At this point, I'm totally weirded out, and already trying to figure out how I am going to end this date. This was brought up very casually, like it was no big deal. Also, he knows that I have 3 cats. We get to the taco place, and he proceeds to ask the staff if they have no-carb tacos. The lady looks confused and basically was like, tacos are pretty much all carbs. He started getting anxious about what to order. I could tell with his mannerisms. I ended up just ordering for us. He proceeded to then get a beer to go, along with a shot of Patron. Got it to go because of the whole pandemic situation. So we get into my car and now I have a bottle of vodka, 2 empty shot bottles of Patron, which he just tossed in the side of the door, as well as a to-go beer and another shot of Patron. He continues to drink and would randomly shout, "Look at us, we are in Colorado eating great tacos. I'm drinking, you're driving, it's beautiful out here." So at this point, I'm desperately wanting to end the date and said I had to go meet a friend. He seemed a little upset by this and also confused as to why I would have plans with anybody else on the day of our date. So we get back to the dealership he works at and said it was fine to just drop him off, but then quickly changed his mind, and he wanted me to bring him into the dealership while people were still working and eat the tacos. He said, "Let's go in. It's a beautiful place. I can drink comfortably. We can eat the tacos." I declined, and we ate them in the car quick. When the plan was for us to go separate ways, he then asks if I can bring him home. I said okay. Anything to get him out of my presence at this point. He also lives close by my apartment. Before we head to his place, he said he had to grab some stuff out of his car. So he gets back in my car, and I hear him put something in the side of the door. I look over and see the handle of a gun. My stomach immediately drops. I was like, "Is that a fucking gun?" He laughed and said, "Yeah, I can't just leave it in my car. I love guns." I told him I was super uncomfortable and he just laughed like, "How would you be uncomfortable?" Basically just said, "Because I don't know you at all, barely. This is our first time meeting, and now you have a gun in my car." Thinking back, I should have told him to get out of my car, but I had never been in this kind of situation before, and the fact that there was now a loaded gun in my car, and he was drunk, I did not know what to do, so just proceeded to leave the dealership and bring him home. So on the way to his apartment, he then asked me if he can see my phone. Thinking in my head like, okay, no way, you're drunk. You have a gun in my car, and you want my cell phone in your possession? I asked why, and he kind of stuttered and said he just wanted to look up a song. I said I would type it in, and he insisted that he type it in. I then just barely blurted out, "No, you have a gun in my car, and now you want my cell phone. Not happening." He keeps seeming so alarmed that I was so freaked out about having the gun in the car, and that he wanted my phone. After typing in the song he wanted, I continued to humor him and make future plans and talk about how great of a time I had. This was the only tactic I could think of to keep him in a positive mood and think that things were going great. All I could think of was the loaded gun next to him. So finally, after what felt like hours, we get to his apartment. As he is getting out of my car, he goes to grab his gun very haphazardly and literally has his finger on the trigger. At this point, he was still in the passenger seat of my car. He then steps out and could probably see the look of fear in my eyes and laughed, and then whipped the gun around in front of him and finally put it in his back pocket. Mind you, once again, he's been drinking this entire time and told me he had shot and killed a cat on purpose. He then told me to keep the bottle of vodka he had bought, so I had to come back later to watch a movie with him. I said absolutely not. Take the bottle, and I will call you after I meet my friend. I never reached out, and I haven't heard from him since. Thank God. So this happened my senior year of college, over a year ago. I lived in a college neighborhood, surrounded by other kids that went to my school, with the exception of a family or two. We knew our neighbors well, and everyone was fairly civil with one another. We did keep in mind, though, that this was a college area, and some sketchy things could happen. I think it was May, when the first break-in happened. I woke up one morning to some texts in my group message telling me that my next-door neighbor's house had been broken into. They had multiple things stolen. A backpack with a laptop and textbooks inside, a gaming console, etc. They had notified the police and they were on the case. This obviously sent my roommates and I into a little bit of a panic, because we were a house of 4 girls, and none of us being wildly brave by any means. We decided the best we could do was make sure our door was locked at all times, whether we were home or not. So that's what we did. Flash forward to a couple of days later. My roommate, Maggie, and I were the only 2 home out of the 4 who lived in our house. We stayed up late watching movies as we always did, and then I headed off to my room to go to bed, while Maggie stayed on the couch. We were, I'm not pleased to admit, the worst at turning off the lights and saving electricity. So this night, the light in the kitchen, living room, and hallway were all on. Sorry, I know. We got better about turning lights off eventually. I slept soundly through the night, and woke up as the sun shone through the cracks in my blinds the next morning. As usual, after I woke up I spent about 10 minutes in bed on my phone before getting up to use the bathroom. On my way back into my bedroom, I noticed that my blinds were tapping slightly against the window frame, suggesting that there was a breeze. My fan was off, and my window was closed, so there should be no movement, right? Well, right, if my window had been closed. When I drew open my blinds, I was absolutely horrified to see that my bedroom window had been completely open all night, or at least since after I had gone to sleep. I knew that my window was shut when I went to sleep the night before, and there is something wildly unsettling about the fact that my bed is also pushed up on the wall right against my window. So perfectly, in fact, that I used to sit in my window, on my bed, with my feet completely able to touch the grass below. That's how low this window was, and that's how close my bed is. Now, at this point, I was frantic. I ran out into the living room to see if Maggie was okay, and if she had noticed anything or heard anything throughout the night. She wasn't home, and I assumed she had gone to class. I texted her immediately, explaining what had happened and asking all of my questions. She responded lightning fast. She had woken up this morning in the living room, and when she walked into her bedroom to get ready for class, her window was open. Her desk, which sits right in front of her window, was pushed away from the wall, and her closet doors, which were always open, because they jutted right up against the carpet so they were very hard to open and close, were closed. She said it looked exactly as though someone pushed her desk away from the window to give themselves more room to enter quietly. In an absolute frenzy, I texted my other roommates, who hadn't been home, in my group message alerting them of what had happened. I crawled the house looking to see if any of my things were missing, and when my roommates came home later that day, they did the same. Nothing had been stolen, not even my laptop or my phone, which were both charging on my bed, right in front of the window. Not even Maggie's Apple Watch that was sitting on her desk in front of her window. We did call the police, and they came to file a report, but they never followed up with us about it. I asked if they could dust my window for prints. as there had to have been handprints because the only way to open my window from the outside is to press your palms directly on the glass and push upward with significant force, but they never followed through with doing that either. I'm not sure really what to think of this, so maybe it was a planned break-in, but they didn't think I would be asleep in their point of entry, but they entered, we think, through another window nonetheless. So why didn't they take anything? And how did the sounds not wake us up? I was directly next to my window, so they would have had to completely jump over my body to enter my room. So I didn't think they did enter from there at least, which is a little relieving. Maybe they didn't enter at all, because the lights were all on and they realized people were home, but our cars were in the driveway, and it did seem as though they entered because Maggie's closet doors were shut. This was super bizarre to me. I'm just relieved that I've since moved out of that house. I'm pretty annoyed that the police didn't take it very serious, but at least I'm also a little relieved that the people who broke in and I never had to meet.
What is the most paranormal or unexplainable events you have witnessed? I have one. It must have been some kind of hallucination, but it really scared me. I was sitting in my bed watching YouTube for a couple hours. I got up and reached forward to set something on my nightstand or whatever. I had this strange, indescribable feeling that I hadn't actually moved from where I was sitting at all. I quickly turned around and looked at where I was sitting seconds before, and there I was, still sitting there. I was outside my body. I could see the shocked, horrified expression come to my face at such a strange sight. I quickly sat back down right in the same spot and nothing strange happened again. I'll bring out this story again. It happened to me 7 years ago and I can't figure it out, but I lost an hour of time in what felt to me like minutes. At the time I was working from home after a serious illness diagnosis. I had settled into a routine. Up at 7 a.m. and do house stuff and shower, then at 8 a.m., start prepping my work and laying out my day. Phone calls and emails from 8 to 9. This is all I remember. It was 7:55 and I brewed a cup of Keurig coffee on my kitchen located on the main floor of my house. I went upstairs to my office and turned on my computer to settle in, and realized I forgot the coffee in the kitchen. I went back downstairs and got the coffee as soon as I realized I forgot it. Couldn't have been more than the time it took Windows to boot up, but I took a sip and the coffee was cold. Not warm, but actually cold. I thought my Keurig was broke, but I looked at the clock and it said 9:14. So whereas I expected it to be 8:05 max, somehow an hour and 10 minutes passed without explanation. It was very bothersome. I have no idea where that hour went. I have never had any blackout before or since, no seizures, and the meds I was on shouldn't have caused a lapse like that. I don't think I fell asleep because I distinctly remember typing my password and saying out loud, "Crap, I forgot the coffee." It kinda left me uneasy a bit. Nothing like had ever happened to me before or since. I'm late, I'm going to get buried. But I'll share something I experienced from ages around 9 to 12 or so. I used to live in a house that was built on old farmland. I slept in a bedroom that had no door. Except for the door leading up to the attic, which had a little sliding lock on it. Every single night I'd close the door and lock it. The attic frequently had birds and such get into it, and I didn't feel like having them fly out. Except, every single morning it'd be unlocked and slightly ajar. During the night I'd wake up and have sleep paralysis. It was pretty frequent and I got used to it. During said sleep paralysis a figure would open up the closet and slip out. All black, sort of shadowy, and wearing what I can only describe as a farmer's hat. It'd stare at me for a moment, just stare. Sometimes it'd take a step over before turning and walking out the entrance to my bedroom. Which lacked a door, but I had set up some beads. They'd knock together. I can still hear it to this day. I had always been told I had an overactive imagination. I never spoke of it to my parents or family since they'd probably make fun of it. One summer my cousin came to visit. She took over my room since my family thought she deserved a larger room for whatever reason. She came down for breakfast in the morning white as a sheet and said I could have my room back. When my mother asked why, she told her she had sleep paralysis and saw basically what I had. I had never spoken to her of this. Years later, Once we had moved out of the house, my mother told me something. Her bedroom was on the same hallway as mine, and she always slept with the door open. She told me some nights she'd wake up just to see a figure pass by the bedroom quickly. She stopped getting up to check it after the first few times, but the house always gave her the creeps. I don't really know if it was a shared delusion or what, but it still scares me a bit to this day. After my mother died, I went to her grave a few times a week. I usually had my kids with me, and this one day as we passed all the older cemeteries, my eldest son, who was 6 at the time, asked, "Mom, what are all those people waiting for? Why are they just standing there?" The cemetery was empty and not a single human was there. When we got to my mom's grave, he held my hand and said, "Don't worry, Grandma is with Mom, and they are happy." Mom was my mother's sister who passed away before my husband and I were even married. My son knew nothing of her or what we called her. He also would tell us when someone had died in a house. When I was 13, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange man's voice. I couldn't understand what he was saying because he was talking really fast, but at one point I heard it say my brother's name, and then it started laughing maniacally. My dad heard it too and came running into my room and turned the lights on. No one was there. Absolutely no explanation. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard what sounded like a cult gathering right outside my window. It was like 3 a.m. and I could just very clearly hear a group of people singing/chanting while a baby wailed. After about 10 to 20 minutes it suddenly stopped. My stepdad found our puppy Eddie on the side of the road. Someone had thrown him out of a moving car and he had broken legs, broken teeth, a swollen and closed eye, and was severely dehydrated. My stepdad took him to the vet and paid quite a bit of money for surgeries to get Eddie fixed up. He got attached to the doggo, so we ended up adopting him. After that, even though he was the family dog, he was best buds with my stepdad. Anywhere my stepdad was around the house you could find Ed tagging along. Eddie and I grew up together. He died while I was in college and my parents buried him in a pet cemetery. Since it was sort of sudden and I was far away, I didn't get to say goodbye. A few months after that I had a dream where Eddie comes and find me. His hair is matted and dirty, and his flesh looks kind of rotted, but he's wagging his tail and seems really happy to see me again. Eddie starts leading me down a hazy path, and the farther we go the faster his tail wags. Finally, we get to this giant wall of mist that extends across the entire horizon and rises higher than I can see. Eddie gets real close to it before trotting back to me. He licks my hand, gives me a couple of nose boops and whines a little. Then he turns around again and starts to do that happy dog prance toward the wall until he finally passes through it. I can sort of see his outline jumping up and down excitedly next to a human-shaped figure. I jog after Eddie and reach my hand out to touch the wall, hoping I'll be able to pass through it, too. That's when my cell phone rings in real life, waking me up. When I answer it, my mom is on the other end crying. My stepdad had just died of a heart attack. Unsure if it's a haunted house or more of something becoming attached to me. Not long after I met my current boyfriend, I would spend the night at his house. Normally I fall asleep as soon as I hit the pillow, but at his house I would be awake super late feeling creeped out. I blamed it on being in a strange house. After a while I used to fall asleep at a decent time, but I would wake up 2 to 3 a.m. and try to let my eyes adjust to the darkness. Small town, very little light pollution. Once I would adjust, I felt like I could see a little boy on top of the grandfather clock. This would happen every night for a while. I never felt scared, just confused. It looked like a boy wearing older style pajamas kicking his legs on top of the clock. Still, I would blame it on sleep paralysis/dreaming or my imagination. When I would go back to my parents' house for the school nights, I would start waking up in the middle of the night seeing the same apparition sitting on the dresser or ledge in my room. I slept alone in the basement of the house. After months of seeing the little boy, I wanted to sleep upstairs again as I figured my mind was just getting to me. One evening I was home alone as my brother and parents were gone to some appointment. I happened to fall asleep on the couch in the living room, only to dream that the little boy was knocking down my mom's ornaments that were on the coffee table. I woke up in a cold sweat and looked at the table. Sure enough, the ornaments were broken. Of course they could have been broken beforehand and I never noticed. It started to get chilly in the living room, so I moved to my mother's bedroom to watch TV before they came home. In her bedroom I kept seeing stuff out of the corner of my eye that looked like the little boy, but never really had a full-on view. At this point I was sure it wasn't sleep paralysis/dreaming because I could move when I woke up, and sometimes I would be wide awake. I fell asleep in my mom's bed and woke up to the little boy laughing and running in the closet. Friday of that week I went to my boyfriend's house and he knew something was up, but I wouldn't tell him out of fear that he would think I was crazy. That night I was helping his mom bake, and I happened to mention that I was having really weird dreams about a little boy, and she asked me if he was a young one with his jammies on. She knew what I was talking about. She told me that their house was pretty old and all throughout the time they lived there strange stuff would happen, such as stuff being moved or hearing voices or laughter, but the past 6 to 8 months things had stopped happening. It's been 3 years and I've moved out with my boyfriend to start post-secondary. Still seeing/sensing/dealing with whatever it is. Things being moved/voices. When I was in high school, my younger brother and I shared a bedroom. His bed was on one side of the room and mine was on the other. My brother was an avid sleepwalker and would also talk in his sleep all of the time. Sharing a bedroom with him, it was unsettling at first, but I eventually got used to it. One night, it's about 3 a.m. and I suddenly wake up from a deep sleep, instantly alert. I had this urge to look towards my brother's bed. I felt a presence in the room. When I turned my head, I saw a tall, skinny shadow/human-like figure and it was reaching its hand down towards my sleeping brother's face. Its hand got maybe an inch away before its head jerked to the side and looked at me staring at it, frozen. The shadow then faded and moved up into the air, vanishing through the ceiling. Immediately, my brother shot up out of his bed, stood and walked to the light switch. He turned it on and looked at me. In a very calm and solemn voice he says, "Did you feel it? Did you feel the hand?" He then turned off the light and went back to his bed. I hid under my covers the rest of the night. My brother doesn't remember any of it. I was 10 years old. It was a Sunday morning between 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. My mother was in the kitchen preparing lunch. As she was washing the veggies, the water pressure from the tap started to fluctuate. Water would flow, stop flowing, like someone was playing around with the tap. My mom asked out aloud on who's messing with the water pressure. The valve for the water tank was just outside my house, and my dad went to inspect it and I followed him. Nothing was out of place. As we walked back into the house we saw before our very eyes, bloody chicken claw prints emerge one by one. It's like a chicken with bloodied feet walked through the hall. Except there was no chicken. Freaked me the hell out, but we were just stunned and stood there staring as one footprint emerged after another. There were about 5 or 6 claw prints in all before it stopped. Everyone in my family saw it. We didn't discuss it immediately. My parents just wiped the claw prints off. What made this event worse was the fact that it occurred during a very turbulent period in my household. My mom had schizophrenia, but at that point she wasn't diagnosed yet. She heard voices in her head, hostile voices, and was convinced that there was a grand conspiracy against her, and people were planning to kidnap me and my sister. She didn't trust my father, her mother and her siblings. So when something legitimately paranormal happens, it just F's everything up. Like in a world where bloody chicken prints appear, why wouldn't there be some occult conspiracy? Those few months were the most traumatic of my childhood. My mom was admitted into a psychiatric facility a few weeks later after being diagnosed with schizophrenia. But dealing with her paranoia and violent outbursts against everyone not her children broke my world. Part of me even believed her. Having some legit paranormal crap happening in the middle of the day didn't help at all. 17 years on, she is still on medication, but she is stable and fully functional. Even when she was going through the worst of her schizophrenic episodes, she was never neglectful. Always loving towards her children, always dutiful. But she was overprotective during those times. I was afraid that I'd get schizophrenia because it is somewhat hereditary. My mom's sister became quite unstable a couple of years ago. To complete the double jeopardy of insanity, my dad's sister also had paranoia and her son was admitted for a manic episode. So this propensity for psychotic disorders on both sides of the family tree has made me pretty resolute on not getting married and having kids. Sorry that this post has veered from bloody chicken prints to me offloading about schizophrenia. I never told any friend or GF about it, so I guess I just took this as a chance to vent. My niece was sitting in the kitchen doing her homework. I was outside playing PvZ on my phone and my mom was doing laundry or something. I heard an awful crashing noise and I ran inside to see dishes shattered all over the kitchen and circling my niece. We asked her what happened and she said the dishes came flying at her. There was no way she could have done it because, like I said, the dishes were circled around her and she couldn't have sat down that quickly. It was weird. One day I was with my friends and suddenly my head started getting heavy and my vision began to white out at the point where I couldn't see anything at all. I immediately thought that someone could have drugged me and asked my friends to help me walk to a place where I could get some air and sit down. My sight was coming back but I couldn't speak or express anything, couldn't respond or answer what my friends were asking. Somehow, I got into a trance and it felt like I was seeing my surroundings from an above me perspective. My friend called my mom and she picked me up. I still couldn't respond until I got home and went to the bathroom. 3 days later, my mom received a call from my grandpa and I immediately knew what was going on. He told her that my dad had passed away and was found dead in his bathroom. I live with my mom and my dad used to live in another state. The forensic report showed that he died in that exact date and probably around the moment I've had that episode. I have a couple. The first one was when my ex died. I had a 4-month-old daughter with him at the time, but we didn't live together. The night he died, I heard someone walking into the bedroom where my daughter was, and very clearly heard his voice talking to her. I called out thinking he may have come in through the back, but no one answered. I found out the next day he died sometime during the night, probably around the time I heard the voice. The second one happened at the last place I lived. It's nothing terribly spooky, but I rented a townhouse and figured out that in my daughter's room there was attic access. I was stoked because that meant I could probably store my Christmas decorations up there. I get a kitchen chair to open it up and I couldn't. Not physically it was easy to open. Something mental stopped me from doing it. I had a huge fear. So I left it alone. Sometimes I'd get really eerie feelings, but I chalked it up to it being the first place I've lived in alone in a while, 2 years at that point. But I don't get those feelings in my new apartment at all. I found out from my neighbor not too long after the attic incident, that the guy who lived there before me was a raging alcoholic and hung himself in the house. In my daughter's room. The one with the attic access. When I was about 5 to 8 I had a little ghost girl that I played with. We played board games and she carried around a small stuffed bunny. My parents saw game pieces move when no one was there, but I saw her. They also saw her on occasion. One night our house caught on fire. Electric short in the kitchen. Parents called 911 etc. Firemen said the fire melted a pipe in under the sink and put itself out. There was soot everywhere. When we came back the next day, written about little girl level in the soot on the kitchen wall it said, "I did it." No one had been in since the fire. I work with donated human tissue. We process stuff like bones, tendons, and skin for transplant. The controlled work area that we process the tissue in, definitely has weird things happen in it. Small stuff like repeated or inexplicable equipment failure, tools falling off flat surfaces, and sometimes the tissue itself will react strangely to processing, i.e. a young donor whose tissue will fall apart or exhibit other poor disposition for one reason or another. Sometimes a donor will have so many problems befall their processing, that it just feels like they did not want their former body parts to be transplanted. I have definitely got strange vibes while working. I'm not saying that they are knowingly or purposefully haunting us, but there is an energy that is hard to deny. I have experienced plenty of weird stuff and it usually doesn't bother me, but there is something around the area I live in currently. It's pale, tall and built like a stick. Everything seems scared of it. It usually shows up around dusk and then slinks off at dawn. Whenever it's around the animals will hide and or freak out. I know that it has come up to our windows before, and I know it stalked me at least once. My automatic assumption when I first encountered it was mountain lion, but I have seen it since then and it walks on 2 legs but crouched and runs like an animal. If this was a bear it would not be so stick-like. It's unexplained and possibly paranormal. I hope it's not paranormal, because some larger livestock have gone missing only to be found shredded later. And no, it can't be coyotes, even the coyotes are scared of this thing. Darn it. I'm just about to go to sleep and I do not want to type this story. But it's too good to pass. It happened to 4 different people in 2 separate occasions. The first one was 8 years ago. I had a roommate who we'll call Karen. I worked in a store not far from our apartment. She texts me while I'm at work and said, "Hey, can you please open the door? I don't have my keys." I answered, "Sorry Karen, the first can't, I'm at work." Her. I can hear your voice in the apartment. I was super confused, so I sent her a selfie/snap of me at work with a confused look. She could hear me talking. The apartment had paper walls so she could actually make out what I was saying. A few minutes later her boyfriend arrived, he heard me too, and as soon as they put the key in the door the voice stopped. Few weeks later my then best friend and I come back from a bar or a concert, I don't remember which. We enter my apartment building and I hear Karen's voice through the door. She had a very loud voice. I look at my friend and like, looks like Karen's home. I put the key in the door, voice stopped. I get inside, there's no one there. My best friend had heard Karen too, mind you. Clear as day, so there's no way I could have imagined it. When I was in junior high school I was good friends with a girl who had some mental health issues. She was smart but had been held back due to absenteeism, whether that was due to appointments, hospitalizations, truancy, not sure. She frequently talked about jinn, a type of demon in her culture. She grew up in Iraq and her family had been persecuted. She might have had PTSD, recalling some other behaviors. She was completely positive jinn had followed her from Iraq, and it was why her family was haunted by bad luck. Her father's anger, their poverty, her mother's sickness, her own nightmares, failing grades, and sadness. She saw jinn everywhere, dark shadows all around our high school and classroom. Sometimes I couldn't find her at lunch because she'd just lock herself in the bathroom, and wouldn't come out until they were gone. I went to her house for a sleepover once and saw flickers of shadows in my periphery all evening. The air felt thick and oppressive, and when I woke up in the middle of the night there was a silhouette standing over me. I pretended to be asleep and it was gone in the morning. Obviously in retrospect, I saw those things because her house was dark and her mother was a hoarder, items piled across the windows and everything covered in dust. And the silhouette was a family member. But at the time, because my friend always ranted and raved with such conviction about misfortune from the jinn, I was convinced it was an unexplained event. On the way home from a wedding with my partner, who was driving, and the kids flat out after picking them up from the babysitter. I was stone cold sober because I didn't think it would be fair for me to drink if he was driving. We were really close to home when I saw some kind of light flash just ahead of us, as did my partner, so he slowed right down. When I looked up, I swear to God all I could see was the underside of a plane as if it was just about to land behind us. I said it in such a panic that my partner stopped the car suddenly. When I told him, in a slightly less panicky voice, he just stared at me as if I'd just lost the plot. Where we were you would have difficulty flying a little drone, never mind a giant plane. We drove on around 200 meters, with me saying I swear to God it was a dark green color, and I could see the two landing gears towards the back. My partner just stopped the car in the middle of the road and I looked. It was like there were two little balls of fire floating above us, about 2 stories high, in front of the car. We jumped out, it was safe, no traffic, all you could smell was burning, and it got really foggy but it started off as 2 floating balls of fire, but when we looked around you could see loads through the fog. We watched them for about 2 minutes and then all of a sudden, they all flew off in different directions. Our house was 2 minutes away, we got the kids inside then went online to see if we could figure it out, but we couldn't.